All right, let's see. Here we go. What's going on, y'all? Pretty solid day today. Wait for a couple more people to jump in. Let's see. Let's get everything. What's going on? Wait a little bit before we jump on in. Dennis, what's up, man? Wes, my guy, man, what's up? I was about to say my dog, and I've combined it with my guy. I can't even speak today, man. Man, we'll wait for a couple more people to jump in. Some good news today, obviously, with Q back. We're going to talk about Q's return, talk a little bit about how the Cards address cornerback moving forward, all that stuff. My guy, Maverick Rowan back. Oh, dude, best sports day in a while. What's up, Tron? What's up, Kyle? Shout out to the third banner in the house. Give it just a couple more seconds. Got to pull stuff up. That's not Dennis. It's Desmond. Sorry, Desmond. I can't read today, man. I can't read. I can't speak. Not even know why I'm going live, to be completely honest with you. It is a good win for our basketball team on Wednesday. That will be the next episode. I plan on doing another episode tonight, assuming that we have power, which at this point in time, we'll see. Kind of live in a wind tunnel. So let's go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and get the sponsors and everything up. All right. Obviously, be sure to leave any questions, comments that you all have so I can talk about the show throughout. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. Okay. 2 words, very simple. He's back. Quincy Riley announces his return to the Louisville football program, completely changing the defensive ceiling in 2024. We'll talk about that and more on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this live edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Thanks for tuning into this live edition of the show. Just a reminder that the show is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Some big news. 2 words, like I said, he's back. One of the top decisions going into the offseason was whether or not Quincy Riley was going to go pro. And on Friday, he announced that he was going to return to the 502, playing what we presume to be his final season in 2024 with the Cardinals. And I must say, it completely changes the ceiling moving forward. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about how Louisville now addresses cornerback throughout the rest of the portal. And then we'll talk about the top 3 defenders on the team being back for 2024. Like I said, appreciate you all for joining in to this sort of impromptu live edition of the show. Shout out to everybody in the chat, Desmond, Kyle, my guy Wes, Tron, etc. If y'all have any comments or concerns, be sure to drop them in the chat. I can't stop smiling at Kyle's Maverick Rowan comment. That's got me kind of geeking right now, which I shouldn't expect anything different. Maverick Rowan's the GOAT. But we're not here to talk about basketball, here to talk about football. We will talk about basketball in the next episode of the show, but that will come later on tonight. I don't think that we truly, at this point, can describe how monumental this decision is. And I mentioned whenever we talked about Quincy Riley potentially coming back that an announcement to return would completely not only change how this team addresses the position through the rest of the portal, but it also addresses, or it completely changes how we look at this defense as a whole. Because Kyle made a comment earlier today, I think it was Kyle, that essentially said that getting Quincy back is essentially bringing in a 5-star transfer. And I couldn't agree with that more. I would probably go as far as saying that probably number 1, number 2, maybe even number 3 at the position in the portal. essentially you're going out and getting a top player in the portal. If you were to relay this to portal talk, but Riley already had played in this system. I felt like in 2023, there were some instances to where he wasn't perfect. Now, defensive back is one of the toughest positions to play in football. That is no shocker. But through his collegiate career, he's only given up 3 touchdowns. That's nuts. That's absolutely wild. He's top 20 in the country, according to Pro Football Focus, in terms of pure coverage statistics. So, I mean, the statistics tell the story, but they also don't tell the full story. I mean, you can gauge by how good he is looking at the coverage stats. He's a ball hawk. I mean, coming into Louisville, he was one of the top players in the country at interceptions. He had 5 interceptions in 2021 before transferring to Louisville. He's had 3 the past 2 years. Most notably the one against USC in the bowl game that prevented the Trojans from scoring on the goal line. But regardless, he's been extremely good in coverage. A lot of times you can tell that simply when you watch games that not many teams throw his way. That is a characteristic of a lockdown cornerback, which, let's call a spade here. Quincy Riley is a bona fide lockdown CB1. One of, if not, I personally thought he was 1A, 1B when it comes to quarterbacks in the ACC this past season. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. I am not sure how he was an all-ACC honorable mention. I felt like he was the biggest snub from the team in the postseason awards. I think at the very least he's a second-teamer. I will say this. I said 1A, 1B because Nate Wiggins is a dog. He's fantastic. He's going to go top 15 in the draft from Clemson. Lock down a lot of opposing wide receiver ones. No disrespect to him. Quincy Riley's right there with him. And I think now, in turn, Quincy Riley will be preseason the best cornerback to return to the ACC in 2024. To push it a little bit further, I think that this is a money year for him. This is a possible All-American season for Quincy Riley coming up. And that's why I said you can't really begin to describe how monumental this is, because, I mean, you talk about the pecking order when it comes to valuable positions and having number one on the team. You talk about quarterback, obviously that has a direct result, a direct association. Edge rusher, left tackle, interior defensive line. I would argue that cornerback is number one in saying that a top cornerback can completely transform your defense, because for starters, it sort of shuts down half of the field. And we talked about adding a guy like Corey Thornton from UCF, adding a player like Tay Holloway from UNC, even losing Jarvis Brownlee, and that hurts. But I looked at Quincy Riley in that decision to where I'm like, ooh, if we can just get him back for one more season, there's no telling what it can do for the defense. Well, there is obviously the question, how does Louisville's scheme change in 2024? Because the back half of the season, now I know you dealt with injuries. You didn't have MJ Griffin for the season. You had some injuries to where Jarvis Brownlee missed some time. Josh Minkins was essentially banged up for a good amount of the season, but the secondary struggled in the back half of the year, beginning with that Virginia game. And it wasn't just the secondary's fault. I felt like at times the pass rush didn't really get home in the back half, last 5-6 games of the year. There were missed tackles that we didn't see. Pretty much outside of that Virginia Tech game, after that, it seemed like the defense started to go downwards. It was a slippery slope and didn't really play up to the potential. I wonder now how Ron English is going to change schematically heading into his second year at Louisville, and how he's going to put these guys into a better position to succeed. It definitely doesn't hurt having Quincy Riley back, because it's not just you're bringing your best cornerback back. It's because your top cornerback just so happens to be literally number one, number two in the conference. I'm biased. The numbers don't lie. The coverage numbers don't lie. The film doesn't lie. It feels like if you think that Quincy Riley is an all ACC honorable mention, two things are true. Number one, you might not know ball. Or number two, you simply just did not watch Louisville. And that's fair. Not everybody's going to watch a team that they don't necessarily cheer for, which I get it. But I know I feel like I'm rambling here a little bit. It's just that this decision, I felt like before the season in 2023 was the last year we were going to have Quincy Riley on the team, because I was almost guaranteeing that he was going to make himself a lot of money and go to the NFL. I still think he's going to make himself a lot of money, but I think that this opportunity is going to show, hey, look, I'm still here. I'm still balling out. And I think that he's going to have a solid year in 2024. Another aspect of this, I feel like Riley improved in tackling this year. He almost doubled his career high, had 33 in 2021 for Middle Tennessee State, had 27 in 2022, but he played a larger role in that aspect this past season. 49 total tackles, which is very, very solid. He had 10 pass deflections, which is a career high. Look, it's a no-fly zone. Ryan tweeted out, Ryan Griffin, shout out to my guy in the chat now. Ryan tweeted out, I forgot the hashtag that he put on there. I think it was it Quincy Island? It might have been MJ Island, but he essentially alluded to, it's a no-fly zone for Q when you're going up against him, and it raises the defense's ceiling significantly. So I think that that's something to focus on. But another thing, it's sort of a two-parter, is what now happens with cornerback moving forward, because it was the number one portal need for the Cardinals just 12 hours ago. It's not the number one need any longer, but do the Cardinals go to the portal to add another cornerback? Do they go with some internal growth at the position? We'll talk about that here momentarily after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. The playoffs start in the NFL this weekend. It's time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. The new Explore tab shows popular bets. The Parlay Hub shows you the best way to find popular parlays and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. Heading on into this second segment of this live edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Thanks for everyone tuning in live and via the recording. Quincy Island, shout out to my guy Wes for correcting me in the first segment. And I think that Kyle mentions DeMar Dorsey. Man, blast from the past there. But main question now, sort of as a result to Q returning, because it's a monumental decision, right? But with some scholarships still remaining, and I know that these numbers are fluid because multiple players are continuing to enter the portal, and you have players committing. The Cardinals at this point haven't heard a commitment yet, but it seems like one is in the pipeline, going to happen soon. We will obviously wait for that to happen to talk about it. But just 12 hours ago, cornerback was in my opinion, the number one need for this team heading into spring practice to be addressed in the portal. You lost Jalen Kimber, the Florida transfer to Penn State. And I mentioned on yesterday's episode that it pretty much shouldn't surprise you. He scheduled a visit to A&M after he committed to Louisville. If a player's scheduling a visit after they committed somewhere in the portal, they're probably not staying. And I'm not too awful hurt about it, because Kimber had his issues with tackling and coverage abilities in 2023 to the point to where Florida fans were pretty excited that he left. Now, that's not to bash the player. That's just to show you some context that he's not a player of Quincy Riley's caliber. And that's okay, because I would argue that there probably are not 10 cornerbacks returning in college football that are of Quincy Riley's caliber. But you look at the room now, you have essentially your starting number one. I would argue that Corey Thornton is going to be your starter alongside of him. The veteran from Central Florida had a very solid career in Orlando. You also bring in a guy like Tay Holloway from North Carolina, former four-star level recruit that started 10 games this past season, has some room to grow. I know that there's been issues with the scheme at North Carolina. Cam Kelly struggled in 2022, played injured, and 2023 he balled out. So there is an avenue, I think, for Holloway, at the very least, to play a rotational role. You look outside of that. You had players enter the portal: Marquise Groves-Killebrew, Derek Edwards, Jarvis Brownlee off to the NFL, Storm Duck graduated. So 4 guys leaving the room. You have a returner like Trey Franklin, who has been a rotational guy for the past couple of seasons. And then things get a little bit interesting because you have youth at the position to where there's a ton of potential. But something that I'm interested to see from this coaching staff is, do they believe in the translatable progression of these players moving forward? And that's the main thing, because there's a couple of young guys. Obviously, Marcus Washington, former 4-star recruit that spent a year at Georgia, didn't play because he was behind a ton of NFL guys, or soon to be NFL guys. He transfers transfers before 2023 and doesn't really play a lot this year. You could probably argue the same thing. You're behind Q, you're behind Jarvis, you're behind Storm, you're behind Trey. Is he a guy that you look for some internal growth to be able to rise up, at the very least, into a rotational spot? You also have a guy like Aaron Williams, who I'm intrigued to see what happens, because you talk about what he did at St. John Bosco. The guy was a lockdown number 1 cornerback against solid high school teams in California, playing on a torn ACL all season long. Pretty impressive. Now, he had that ACL surgery before he got to Louisville and rehabbed this whole season, so you assume that he's going to be able to regain that explosiveness. Now, as a redshirt freshman, he's been in the system a year to where he can learn the playbook. I look for him to really take the next step forward. I think he's the guy that not many people are talking about. I mean, sure, you're discussing him, but I don't feel like we're talking about him enough in terms of what he's going to be able to do this upcoming season. And that's something that I'm really, really interested to see how Louisville's going to address moving forward. There's a couple freshmen that I don't really expect to play right away. Raymond Mosby from Alabama, and you have some other defensive backs entering the team via the high school ranks. Honestly, for me, I think that this team could potentially add one more player at the position because you lost some guys. I mean, sure, you have brought 3 players in. I think you're probably going to bring at least one more cornerback in, depending on who leaves. If you have more players enter the portal, then you can go at the spot and add a cornerback. I think you probably go to the portal and add one more player that can at least serve a rotational role. It doesn't seem like there might be a ton of starting snaps right away, because there's going to be a big battle in spring practice, in fall camp, with Holloway, with Corey Thornton. And if you add another player who could also be into that mix and compete, well, then you're in a very good spot. But I would probably bank on the team adding one more cornerback, at least, in my opinion. Now, Broly mentions a good point. With not a ton of portal activity right now, with the shockwave that was Nick Saban retiring, could that change anything? It potentially could. Broly says time to go shopping for players from Alabama, not just Alabama. Yes, because Alabama has one of the most talented rosters all in college football, but Washington, Kalen DeBoer, is now at Alabama, so the Washington players have a chance to enter the portal, and whoever Washington hires, it's going to be a trickle-down effect. Now, there's going to be a lot of schools competing for these players because they're going to be high-caliber players, but Louisville has gone in the portal and gotten some big-time names. So I'm not sure if they're going to be able to shell out a ton of NIL capital now. I mean, I would assume that they probably shelled a lot of it out, but 502 Circle continues to amaze. And we'll see. I think that there's probably larger needs at the moment, like another edge rusher. Quan mentions, do you think we are playoff contenders? I think we're in contention for an opportunity. He also says we need more tight ends. Give it about 24 to 48 hours, and I don't think we'll have a need for a tight end. Read as that as you will. It's probably not secret knowledge at this point, but to make a long story short, You have done a good job in the portal so far, bringing in Thornton and Holloway. You have some younger guys that I think will project to be solid players. I also want to know Day McCullough, the Oklahoma transfer that can play cornerback, that you can see also play safety, what his role is going to be. Tamarian McDonald, the safety from Tennessee, plays in the slot. So whether he's taking up more snaps at the star position or at safety or at cornerback in the nickel slot, we'll see. I think there's a couple different ways to look at this, but I think at this point in time, we're going to see, I think Louisville's going to add one more guy. Could potentially be a multiple year player that they look to grow into the role heading in to 2025. So that's my bet moving forward. So Kyle, you mentioned a good point about needing an impact edge player, and we'll talk about that in the final segment when we discuss the Cardinals bringing back their top 3 defenders. We've talked about one. Who are the next 2? We'll talk about that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets, and it's the fast and easy way to buy for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. From seat views on the app, all-in prices up front, and last-minute guarantees, Gametime has got you covered. I bought some tickets to the Colts-Raiders game a couple weeks ago and bought them 30 minutes before the game, and it definitely paid off. I got the lowest price out there. It showed me exactly the view that I was getting, and it will be my preferred vendor of choice moving forward. So definitely be sure to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning into this live edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I know it was a little bit impromptu, but it's been a couple weeks since we've done a live episode. Wanted to get your all's thoughts. Obviously, Quincy Riley returning is monumental news. He's one of the top 3 defenders on the team, and thankfully, all 3 will be returning for 2024. Well, actually, I'm not going to really number them because they're all pretty solid, but number 1 in chronological order in terms of this episode, we just talked about Quincy Riley. Number 2, Ashton Gelati. That decision was key as well. You have one of the best edge rushers in the conference, in the country, had another step forward in 2023, career number in sacks. He had 11. He had 45 total tackles, which is almost double than his career high coming into the season. 3 forced fumbles, which is a career high. And the 6'3" native of Boca Raton, Florida, is coming back in 2024. And like I said, having an edge rusher of his capability, it completely transforms the ceiling of this defense. And I think that that's key. Who else? Who's the other one? Well, family member in the chat, that is MJ Griffin, missed the entirety of the 2023 season. Unfortunately, was primed for a breakout season. I had an episode that literally was titled, Why MJ Griffin is Primed for a Breakout Year in 2023. You best damn believe I'm going to have another episode that's going to be titled, Why MJ Griffin is Primed for a Breakout Season in 2024. Because, when you watched him play in 2022, transferred from Temple, had 45 total tackles, 1 pass deflection, 1 forced fumble, 2 interceptions, really didn't see as much time as he needed to in the final year of Scott Satterfield. But when he played, he was one of the best players on the defense. He is a ball hawk out in center field that can defend the run, but also excel in coverage too. He's a top 3 defender on the team. In fact, before the year, when I was ranking the 15 top players for the Cardinals overall, regardless of position, MJ checked in at number 4. And from what I've been told, and Ryan can attest to this, physically, MJ is getting back to the level that he was. Obviously, these injuries, you have to factor in a ton of mental fatigue with this because, as a guy who has torn his ACL, it's challenging to return from. Now, sports medicine has made it easier to return from an injury like that than it has ever been. But there's still a mental hurdle, but MJ is going to be a guy that's going to make himself a ton of money in 2024. I've already said it. My hot take in 2023, the offseason, was that Jawar Jordan was going to get over 1,000 rushing yards. I've already determined what my 2024 hot take is, and that is he is at least going to be all ACC second team level. That's my hot take. That is what I am hitching my wagon to, and I firmly believe that's going to be the case because I think that this defense really emphasizes just his overall skill set. He's going to get the opportunity to do what he needs to do. Ryan says, trust me, his mind is letting his body do what he needs to do, and that's great to hear. Love to hear that. But overall, you bring three players back to the team, all in different positions. You have two players in the secondary, and I think that that's key for a secondary that struggled down the stretches. You have two players that are key coming back in that room. And then you return arguably your best player on the team, regardless of position. That is Ashton Gillotte. So we talked about how critical a CB1 and a top edge rusher are, probably top four overall in positions with quarterback and left tackle. Now, Kyle mentions just need to get an impact edge rusher. If so, I'm purchasing my Super Bowl tickets for the Cards. I think that really makes a ton of sense here. You need another edge rusher. I think that bringing your top three defenders back, number one, reemphasizes that this 10-win season was not a fluke. I think that the schedule gets a little bit more challenging in 2024 because the road games are tougher. You're going to South Bend. You're going to Lexington. You're going to Death Valley Junior. Had to put that in there. LSU is the real Death Valley. Sorry, not sorry. But Death Valley down in South Carolina obviously is pretty intimidating as well. But long story short, you have some tough matchups on the road this season for the Cardinals. But it still is a schedule filled with opportunity. SMU is another top team that Louisville's going to play that could throw a wrench in the plans. But I think that the talent is there. Obviously, Jeff Brom and company have really, really utilized the portal to their advantage, and something that you can't take for granted either. But anytime you can bring your top three defenders back in this current landscape, it's almost unheard of for a program of Louisville's stature to bring their top three defenders back. Because if they're past their junior season or third season in college, most of the times they go to the NFL. Or they get poached by a larger blue blood program. And I appreciate the loyalty from all three of these guys that definitely could have gone elsewhere and truly competed for a national championship at one of the top 5 programs in the country. I appreciate all three of these guys for sticking with the program. Griffin, I felt like this would have been a money year for him in 2023. It's going to be a money year for him in 2024. He's got 2 years of eligibility remaining. I don't think that he's even going to need the second one because he's going to put himself so far into NFL draft circles and conversation that, he's going to have a great amount of opportunity for life-changing money here in a little over 18 months in the 2025 NFL draft. But huge, huge news for this program. Quincy Riley coming back. If you've read the title, read it again and then read it again. Go to sleep, wake up tomorrow morning, read it one more time because Quincy Riley returning raises Louisville's ceiling considerably in 2024. This offseason has been legitimately a realistic best case scenario for this program. Defensively, for certain, the team has upgraded, I think, personnel-wise, defensively across the board. And we'll see. Obviously, you got to play the games, but on paper, it looks promising. I appreciate you all for tuning into the live edition of the show. I appreciate everyone commenting. Definitely grateful for that. The next episode, I don't know if it's going to be a live episode. It might be a live episode if I have power here in a couple hours. It would be later on this evening. But regardless, we're going to talk about Louisville's men's basketball road win against Miami. We'll have a conversation about Mike James and Brandon Huntley Hatfield. we will also dive into a weekly mailbag. So be sure to tune into that. I will try to give you all some notice if that's going to happen live or if it's going to be a pre-recorded show. But regardless, if I have power, you will have another episode before the Cardinals tip off with NC State at noon tomorrow, KFC Yum Center. But that's going to wrap up this live edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Everyone have a great day. Stay warm, stay safe, and we'll see you right back here very soon. Go Cards.